Welcome back to the channel. Let's talk about the COVID-19 and the emergency vaccines. COVID-19 is a virus in the coronavirus family. Viruses in this family are constantly mutating. Common cold and flu viruses are also in this family. Vaccines have proven to be minimally effective for reasons other than just the mutation rate. When one virus enters a cell, its RNA is rapidly transcribed to the point that the cell ruptures and dies. These viruses are so small that huge amounts of new viruses can be produced from a single infected cell. This quickly overwhelms any latent antibodies from prior infection or immunizations. It is merely an issue of being overwhelmed by sheer numbers. With most cellular diseases, the reproduction rate is very small and very few disease cells enter the body. This makes it quite easy for the limited number of antibodies to control and kill the disease cells before they can cause much damage. This is not the case with these coronaviruses. You may have 10 million antibodies, but if they are overwhelmed by 1 billion viruses, then at best the immunity is not that effective. It will take your body some time to produce enough antibodies to kill all the viruses. The current group of COVID-19 vaccines, except for the J&J, are relying on mRNA technology. There is a broad misconception that these vaccines will make them immune to COVID-19. The design goal for these vaccines was to reduce the severity of the disease by 50%, not to provide immunity. COVID-19 enters the cells through an ACE2 receptor. There are many cell types that have these receptors. Nerve and mucous cells are among them. The COVID-19 virus actually is not that lethal. The Spanish flu fatality rate was 1.4%, and COVID is running about 0.4%. But people are dying from COVID-19 for many reasons. We need to talk about the reliability of the metrics for this disease. For the first time in history, the sole metric to determine infection has been a PCR test. At no time in this pandemic was the PCR test validity challenged. The test is looking for some fragments of proteins. It is not known if these fragments are produced by other external or internal biologics. There is also the issue of how many cycles should be used to determine a positive presence for the protein. Too many cycles result in many false positives. The tests can also produce false negatives. The PCR test should only be used in conjunction with other clinical symptoms, which it is not. Many people have died with COVID-19 from other comorbidities, but the COVID-19 was not the primary cause of death. But COVID-19 does kill healthy people. We need to understand how this happens. Lung cells have ACE2 receptors. These cells become infected, and histamines are released by the immune system, which causes a local edema or swelling with lymph fluid. This buildup of fluid in the lining of the lungs prevents the transfer of oxygen and CO2. If bad enough, the person will essentially suffocate. The problem is this response, often referred to as a cytokine storm, and it varies from individual to individual. Many people contract the disease and have no symptoms at all. Some contract it and die from pneumonia. There is a full symptomatic range in between. Some experience loss of taste, smell, and hearing. The problem is that the immune response system in some individuals overreacts and causes all kinds of temporary and permanent damage. Any cell in your body with an ACE2 receptor can potentially be infected. The lethality of this virus is rather low. The problem is that our society is so risk averse that it is not willing to be exposed to even minimal risk. This drove the draconian lockdown of society. This also drove Operation Warp Speed to produce experimental vaccines quickly, even though their overall design efficacy was going to be minimal. For the first time in history, a new mRNA technology was going to be used to elicit an immune system response in humans during a pandemic. Instead of injecting a bunch of dead or weakened viruses to elicit an immune response, they used a lipid nanoparticle to transport a small piece of RNA into your cells. This RNA caused the infected cells to express a spike protein that has been designed to trick your immune system into thinking it is a COVID-19 virus. Your immune system sees these proteins and generates antibodies. This expression process always kills the healthy cells that are infected with this mRNA vaccine. This vaccine acts just like a virus. The only difference is that it cannot reproduce itself. This process tricks the infected cell into becoming a super factory to produce millions of spike proteins that mimic COVID-19 spike proteins. This is a highly efficient process and results in large amounts of antibody response. Standard vaccines do not kill any cells in your body. The J&J vaccine is a standard vaccine. If you are coerced into taking a vaccine, opt for the J&J. These lipid nanoparticles can easily enter any cell in your body they come in contact with. If it does enter a cell, it hijacks the cell to constantly produce spike proteins until the cell ruptures, i.e. expression, releasing the spike proteins and also killing the host cell. The good news is that this technology does produce a substantial antibody response, but at the cost of killing millions of healthy cells. Classic vaccines are supposed to be injected IM or intramuscular. The injection material is supposed to remain in the lymph of the shoulder muscle where the immune system will react to the foreign material. That is why you must always aspirate the needle before injection to prevent insertion directly into the circulatory system, which can cause a severe reaction. The medical community has been instructed that it is not necessary to aspirate COVID-19 vaccine injections, so they are not aspirating. The manufacturers of these vaccines have stated that the lipid nanoparticles will not escape into the circulatory system. Unfortunately, this may not be true. These particles are so small, they can and do go anywhere, even through the blood-brain barrier with little effort. They easily pass from the lymph into the capillary system. That is why we are seeing so many wildly variable reactions to these vaccines. We have no idea where and what cells will be infected with these lipid nanoparticles. These particles can easily infect the blood cells, causing clots. Remember, all cells that uptake these lipid nanoparticles will die. The problem is that this vaccine technology has never been approved for humans because it has a proclivity to over-amplify the body's future infection response to such a degree that it often kills the host when the host is later challenged with the real virus. We will not know how prevalent this over-response will be over time and if it will ever subside. For some, the vaccine response will be worse than the disease and potentially for the rest of their lives. The etiology for this adverse response mechanism is not understood. So let's look at a potential nightmare scenario. Most of the population has probably already contracted COVID-19 and their symptoms were so mild that they did not realize they had it. If they were to be reinfected a year later, their response would probably be the same. However, if these people get a vaccine, their immune system may become overreactive to this virus, and when they are infected with the virus in the future, they may have a violent reaction to the reinfection and potential death. And this potential overreaction will be with them for the rest of their lives. Unfortunately, Big Pharma will state that annual boosters are the answer, when in fact it is the mRNA that is the problem. The COVID-19 virus is not going away. The medical community is already stating that routine booster shots will be required annually. This will increase the prevalence of adverse reactions, but there is a much bigger problem with the vaccines. When the immune system comes in contact with a foreign protein, it develops a broad recognition pattern for that protein. It may develop hundreds of recognition patterns that match that virus. This is very beneficial when dealing with COVID viruses that rapidly mutate. Yet the virus mutates off a few of the recognition patterns, the immune system will still pick up on the remaining patterns. However, in the case of the COVID-19 vaccine, only a small pattern is presented, i.e. the spike protein. If the virus mutates off that single pattern, then the vaccine is worthless. Let that sink in. This virus already has numerous mutations. It may have already mutated off the vaccine-generated spike protein. Yet as soon as a new variant is identified, the vaccine community immediately states that the mRNA vaccines are probably still effective against it without any meaningful testing to verify it. They do not know. You are being played. The CDC has shown that the surface vector of COVID-19 is very low, about 1 in 10,000. So ditch the hand sanitizers and wash your hands before you eat, and you will be just fine. The greatest vector is from aerosolization, from talking and coughing in close quarters. You need to stay away from anyone talking without a mask in an indoor closed area. If someone is quietly eating at a table, there is no aerosolization vector. That is perfectly safe. The problem occurs when in a cramped restaurant or bar with a bunch of individuals sitting around talking. We must remember that these vaccines are experimental only. Anyone taking them is essentially a guinea pig. Each individual must assess his personal levels of risk aversion. The amazing thing is that the vaccine does not provide any immunity, only a potential 50% reduction in the severity of the disease if you contract it. How long this limited protection lasts is still not known. They say follow the science. Science has nothing to do with these lockdowns that do not work. Ask Sweeting. Here is a list of the lies. It's just to keep from overwhelming medical services. It is just to flatten the curve. We are running out of ventilators. We are running out of hospital beds. We are running out of medical personnel. We cannot bury the bodies fast enough, so we store them in reefer trucks. It's just until we get a vaccine. Trust the science of a select few. Disregard all the rest. 6 feet separation will protect you. You do not need a mask. You now need a mask. You now need an N95 mask. Wait a minute. Fabric masks are just fine. Only medical people need N95. You now need 2 masks. The more the better. Surface sanitizers will protect you. Oops, the surface vector is only 1 in 10,000. Contact tracing is critical to controlling this disease. Oops, contact tracing has no impact on stemming the spread of the virus. You will get better soon. Complete lockdowns work. PCR tests are the definitive diagnostic tool. 40 cycles are just fine. Oops, any more than 25 cycles is unreliable. But hey, trust the science. The vaccine will protect you from getting infected. Oops, at best the vaccine will only reduce your symptoms by 50%. The government has purchased numerous vaccines at a very high financial cost. They do not actually prevent you from getting infected. The government needs to show that they are competent and that the vaccines are effective. That means their infections and morbidity rate metrics need to drop after widespread vaccinations. That is easily accomplished by just lowering your PCR testing rate and reducing the PCR cycles. That will result in a miraculous drop in infection rate, which is exactly what we're seeing. Stop misdiagnosing non-COVID deaths as COVID deaths, and you will also lower the death rate. Presto! The pandemic is waning and life can go back to normal. You can easily manipulate the metrics and the masses to get any results you want, but nothing will have changed. Start resisting now. Do not trust what they are saying to you. Thanks for watching.